Last time I made a game in 2 weeks. It's time to up the challenge. We are now making a game in 3 days. During the weekend, I participated in the BenBonk Game Jam number 2, a game jam organized by the YouTube channel BenBonk, with a time limit constraint of just 72 hours and the theme of limited space. When I heard the theme, I quickly had the idea of being a spaceship and having to fly around while avoiding a deadly border. I thought of other ideas too, but in the end I came back to this one. I quickly got the basic movement implemented. You turn from side to side and activate your propeller to move forwards. I didn't want this game to be too easy though. I wanted it to be somewhat hard to control, so it takes significant time to accelerate or change direction, which I think is where the fun is for this game. I also added particles, so it's clear when you are propelling and in which direction. I then drew a player sprite and put it in the game. Of course, the spaceship will be flying in space, so I made the background black and added 2 parallax layers of stars. Now, to have the limited space thematic, I added a border that closed in on the player, and the player would have to avoid touching it. Now that I had the basic movement and environment, I had to work on the game loop, meaning I had to decide what the player would be doing on each session. The idea that I had was that there would be randomly positioned targets which you would have to hit, and each time you hit one, the border would grow a little bit, giving you more time. After implementing that, it looked like this. At this point, I realized that the game was actually fun to play. If you are enjoying this video so far, please consider subscribing. But there was a problem here. If the target spawned near the border, then the border could easily eat up the target and leave the player with nothing to do. To fix this, I made it so there would be some sort of margin around the border that could drag along the target. This made it so a target could never be beyond the border, and made it so the game could be played indefinitely now. Now that most of the gameplay was done, I started finishing up the game by working on the menus. I finished up all the menus and started working on the music. To make the music, I used Busca Kyoal, and this is what I ended up with. This was my first time making this kind of ambient action music, but I think it still turned out fine. And the last thing I had to do before publishing was fix an issue. You see, because the border drags along the targets, that meant that if you stayed in the center all the time, the border would eventually drag the target into you, forever. To fix this, I decided I would add bombs that spawn at the player position and explode after a bit. With that done, the last bit I had to do was name the game. I really didn't have the energy to come up with a good name, so I just called it Cornered Rocket. After that was done, I had to submit to itch.io. At this point, I had about an hour to submit, so I compiled all the builds and started uploading them to itch.io. But I had internet issues and couldn't submit anything other than the web build. I really wanted to have builds for all platforms though, but luckily for me, I contacted BenBonk and he told me that I could remove my submission, add the other builds, and then he'd let me submit as a late entry. And so I did, and just like that, I got Cornered Rocket submitted to the jam. In the end, I think I accomplished what I wanted to do quite well. The feedback I got was very positive overall, and people seemed to have the experience I wanted them to have. The 72-hour game jam experience was definitely more stressing than the 2-week experience, but I think I managed it quite well, although I would still say I prefer longer game jams, but this was valuable experience nonetheless. This has been Cyanide, and thanks for watching.